What is going on, guys? This is Miasin, and this might very well be the most optimal way to play Cyber Dragons in the TCG. Now, even in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, this is perfectly playable. It's just that the deck list would be very much different because there is Max C, and that applies that you might have to play more hand traps since you can actually draw those hand traps off of Max C. And while you're at it, you might as well just play more cards that kind of brick, since at least you're gonna have more, draw power, so I guess you might as well. So if you are trying to play in Master Duel, don't necessarily look at this deck list to copy it, just take inspiration from this. And even if you're playing in the TCG, I never recommend people to copy. I think that's a pretty bad mentality. You should always look at the deck list with a grain of salt and just try to, inspire yourself from what I am showing you right here. So before this video starts, make sure you like and subscribe. Check me out on Twitch and Instagram and all the good stuff. And with that being said, let's jump right into it. So, as you can see, I'm playing a bunch of Cyber Dragons, and by a bunch I'm playing, I mean, just a very small amount, and they are the only monsters in my deck, actually. I'm not playing any other monster that goes second, like Kaiju, Pankratops, Nibiru, Ash, etc. So, only the Cyber Dragon monsters. One Cyber Dragon, one Dry, one Nexture, double Hertz, and triple Core, of course. Cyber Dragon is very bricky if you play more than one. You never want to draw this card in more than one copy of, and honestly, even drawing a single copy of Cyber Dragon can be very frustrating. Really important mentality to have when you're trying to play competitively is assuming the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario in a YCS is that people force you to go first. Now, if you're not prepared and you're playing a glass cannon, that's the term I was looking for, glass cannon build of Cyber Dragon that just plays a lot of bricks and is just trying to go second and is kind of like a one-trick pony and cannot go first at all, what happens is that people, when they win the dice roll, they start making you go first, and you always lose game one by default because your deck is just not really well equipped to go first. But if your deck is just as good going first and second, just like Cyber Dragon, because it's inherently good going second, so what you really have to do is kind of balance out the flaw of the deck by making its going first better, so that way you are always prepared for people to make you go first, and therefore you brick less often, your deck becomes more consistent. It doesn't do that many things, but what it does, that is limited, it does very well. So yeah, consistency is extremely important, and that's why we're not trying to play Machine Dupe and multiple Cyber Dragons, because drawing those cards in bad ratios, or when you don't want them, or when you get interrupted, is just not the best. With trap cards, you get to kind of interact with your opponent's board. You look at your opponent, like you're opening a hand, and you're like, okay, my hand obviously can auto-TK, but at least what I can do is pick apart my opponent's board, and in the grind game, I simplify it, and I take advantage of it so that on my follow-up turn, on turn 4, I get to kill my opponent probably, or turn 6, or whatever. Take your time. What is really important is that you eventually win. But yeah, only one Cyber Dragon, one Dry. That is a card that you can search with Emergency in order to make all of your Cyber Dragons level 5, so that way you can access Nova and Infinity. That is the way you can still make those Xyz monsters without having to rely on Galaxy Soldier. Galaxy Soldier is another card that can potentially brick. It also forces you to play 3 copies of Cyber Dragon Hertz, which I'm not a really big fan of, because even though Core is the main normal summon of the deck, if you draw like multiple Hertz and stuff like that, it becomes really bad. You really only want to see Core most of the time. The other cards are just kind of, you want to have access to them when you want to, but you don't want your hand get clogged off of these cards, because there are already a lot of other bad cards that you don't necessarily want to draw, like opening turn 1, like Cyberload Fusion turn 1 is just not ideal, except if you have like Cybernetic Overflow, because then what you can do is like pop multiple cards your opponent controls, and then Cyberload, shuffle them back, make Rampage, pop even more back row. So against back row decks, Cyberload Fusion is a great card, but apart from that, I don't know. So yeah, again, I think the explanation for the Cyber Dragon monsters is relatively clear, but if you have more questions, make sure you let me know in the comment section below. And then 3 copies of Emergency, double copies of Prosperity, and 1 Cyberload Fusion. Only 2 Prosperity, because you typically can only really afford to banish 3 cards, except if you know what you're playing against, and you know for a fact that the Mega Fleet and Fortress are not that impactful, then you can afford to banish 6 cards. But if you draw way too many Prosperities, then you have to banish 3, and it's not, like, good, because obviously you can't really banish 9 cards with Prosperity. You're gonna have absolutely nothing in your extra deck, and your deck is not going to be effective enough. So that's the reason why it's just a 2 of, and like I said, it can get negated, or it can just be not the best. And if you're trying to OTK as well, it halves the damage, so sometimes it can make it so you can't even kill your opponent. So I think 2 is the perfect ratio. I'm not playing Overload Fusion because Cyberload Fusion is already a brick on its own, so I don't really want to multiply the problem by 2, even though it's pretty good with Verte Anaconda. This deck does not rely on Verte Anaconda, so if this card gets banned, ironically, Cyber Dragons almost get a boost because at least some of the bad matchups that it has, like all the decks that can abuse Phoenix Enforcer will get significantly weaker, which means that this deck becomes better, you know? That's a relatively smart way of seeing things. Anyways, that's it for the monsters and spells. For the traps, triple Imperm. Way better than playing a card like Valor, for example, in this deck, because it always has some form of value when you're going second, since your opponent already puts cards in the spell and trap zone with monsters already there, so you can always put the Imperm in front, and because of that, you can also interact with your opponent's spells and traps. So sometimes this card looks more like a Solemn Judgment for spells and traps than it is a Valor, but I really like the 2-in-1 package deal that it has. When you want to use that as a hand trap, you can do that, so it's infinitely better than... oh my... LMAO, yak sign! It's infinitely better than Valor for those reasons, and also it cannot get hit by Called by the Grave, and it doesn't trigger your opponent's triple tactic talents, and that's pretty much it. So 3 Ice Dragon's Prison, 3 Crackdown, they follow the same logic, so both of these cards are cards that can unbreak you because you can steal your opponent's monsters and link with them to make the Lina, and then crash on your opponent's monster, and then Surge the Cyber Dragon Core so you can play in main phase too. But of course, these cards are also interruptions. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be using Ice Dragon's Prison as a Monster Reborn. You can use it as a double banish, which is the main utility of the card, I want to say. But sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures, so you have to do that. And Crackdown is not once per turn, so that's a pretty cool thing about the card. And you can use Crackdown when you are under Rivalry and Gozen, even though it doesn't respect the conditions of these cards. So definitely do keep that in mind. I showcased that in my combo video. Make sure you watched it, by the way. Anyways, 3 Torrential. It's relatively good against combo decks, but it's not great against control decks, so you do have to change the deck quite a lot post Game 1. I want to say in Game 1 against Eldritch, you're pretty screwed because the majority of these cards actually do nothing at all. Only Ice Dragon's Prison and Overflow have value, and actually Unending Nightmare, but Solemn Strike and Rivalry goes in Torrential against Eldritch. Absolute garbage. So the best way to look at Cyber Dragon is as, you know, a meta call. It's not a deck that always has plenty of good matchups all across the table, because it's always going to have those, you know, bad matchups like the trap decks. I mean, you can accept the Game 1 loss against them and then destroy them in Game 2 and 3 if you are well equipped to beat them. Anyways, one copy of Trap Trick, I just needed a 40th card that wasn't a 3rd Prosperity. And you cannot play Upstart Goblin because it can clash with Prosperity. Triple Overflow, popping it is very, very good because you get to search the emergency so you can unbrick with the second effect of Overflow. And you can recycle back your cards with Cyberload, so you always have fuel with Overflow. The card's just broken. And like I said, triple Crackdown, triple Gozen, triple Rivalry. These cards actually hit so many cards this format, it's actually crazy. One Unending Nightmare, you can pop your own Overflow, so even if your opponent doesn't even play spells and traps that you can destroy, this card is always really good. And even against the combo decks, this card is really good. I mean, it pops the Journey of Destiny, Boot Sector Launch, so many cards, man. I really like Unending Nightmare, just overall. And finally, 3 Solemn Strike. Now, Solemn Judgment does not work well with this deck because it is still a going second deck, and Solemn Judgment is ineffective against already established boards, where Solemn Strike can negate activated effects of monsters on the field. So if your opponent already has a bunch of huge monsters on the field, you can go Torrential Strike, and that is a 2-card combo that literally deals with your opponent's board that can have billions of negates. So yeah, that's it for the main deck. Now moving on into the extra deck, 3 Mega Fleet and 2 Fortress. So you always have ways to clear your opponent's extra Monster Zone cards and main Monster Zone machine monsters. Like Appaloosa against this deck is a joke, and I don't know, Machine decks against this deck is a joke. So Sky Striker is actually like the freest matchup ever. You immediately win on the spot. Anyways, 1 Rampage, Zeus, Infinity, Nova. You make the Zeus on top of Infinity or Nova if you can't really use its negate for something. And you can easily get a Zeus with 4 materials because Infinity can absorb a monster. So that's that. And for the links, I'm playing Auradon, Seeger, Lina, Verte Anaconda, Linkribo, and Relinquished Anima. I think for the most part, all these links are very intuitive in what they do, but Auradon can recycle back a trap card from your graveyard, so it's actually really neat in this deck. You can make it with Seeger and Nexter, so Nexter can revive back the Seeger, and then you're locked under Machine, so you can't really make Verte. So you at least can make Auradon summon your 3 tokens, tribute 3 tokens, recycle back literally any trap card in your graveyard, and that is, I guess, an interruption, so pretty interesting. Lina can crash, get your engine started, Verte can shuffle back Cyberload, well, send Cyberload, and then summon Rampage, and then the Linkribo and Relinquished Anima. Relinquished Anima using Cyber Dragon Hurts, and Linkribo is there because if your opponent goes Valor on the Nexter, you can chain Linkribo from grave, tributing the Nexter for cost, and then reviving back the Linkribo, and still triggering the effect of Nexter to revive back a machine monster from her grave. Now, for the idea section, I'm playing a lot of cards that are also very intuitive in what they do. Nibiu, Jizukiru, Pankratops. These cards are a little weirder though. Mana Dragon Zornitrion, Inspector Border, and Thunder King Ryo. Mana Dragon Zornitrion is a card that I already made a full card review on it, so make sure you check it out on my channel if you haven't already, if you don't really understand what the card does. But it's very similar to, I guess, King of the Sky Prison in a way. Not really, actually, because King of the Sky Prison prevents your opponent from even destroying your spells and traps, whereas Mana Dragon Zornitrion, it doesn't really prevent your opponent from doing that. But if he does destroy one of your spells and traps, you summon Mana Dragon from your hand or graveyard, and then resets back any of your, I think, engrave or banish spells and traps. So it's very cool, but King of the Sky Prison is probably a little better. And then, of course, Inspector Border if you have to go first and you want to floodgate your opponent. Thunder King Ryo is very similar. Those cards are really good when you have to go first. And Train Package with double Mega Fleet or like, I don't know, Machina Citadel with the Overdrive. That's a really cool package that you can play. Down of Magician, Sky Cavalry Centauria, Puzzlomino, Heatwave for going second, and then Forbidden Droplet and Evenly Matched. So that's pretty much it for this deck profile. Let me know what you guys actually think in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.